So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to our first educational web series. I'm Jeremy Russell and I'm new to Matrix Integrated. Kind of a throwback. I used to work with Dave a long time ago, back in the mid 90s. Did some other things, had a family, moved out west, and kind of came back full circle. We also are joined by Nate Williams, account manager, marketing specialist, sales guy, jack of all trades of Matrix Integrated, and he's going to be kind of working with me to answer some questions around the cloud. And we're gonna treat this session as a kind of a learning, kind of back up and kind of say what is the cloud and define it as it pertains to business applications, and kind of go through the Cloud 101 as we're kind of entering into, believe it or not, the second decade of the cloud being a term. What does it mean and how do you take advantage of it? If does it make sense to take advantage of, and talk about its aspects. With that being said, we're going to define the cloud, and use the term being used lightly. We're going to talk about, I think, the three major components of benefit from the cloud, which is access, storage, and computing, and different ways that shows face, and again, the cloud being a fairly light term, and different ways that you can access that. And I'll go through some definition of terms that are pretty common in the marketplace. And then we'll try to kind of along the way bring up real life examples of how people are using it that we see in our client base, previous experiences from other companies we've worked with, and try to define that by, is the application or the example an extension, or is it on purpose? Is how that application utilizes the cloud for its purposes, and was it built that way to begin with, or did it kind of morph into that as along the way? So kind of jokingly, I looked up the definition of cloud from Webster's, and this is a cloud, visible mass of particles of condensed vapor, such as water, ice, suspended in the atmosphere of the planet, such as Earth or Moon. That's the definition of a cloud. So when you look at that and kind of look at it, how it compares to the definition of cloud computing, the practice of storing regularly used computer data on multiple servers that can be accessed throughout the internet. So we're going to talk about how access and storage are key, but computing, one thing I think Webster's left off is the computing power of the cloud, and how it can be utilized from a shared resource perspective, not only accessing data and on multiple servers. So three terms that are really common and that need to be talked about and sort of defined are IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So in the first one, this first one stands for infrastructure, the second one stands for platform, and the third one stands for software. And when you look at, it's kind of the footprint of those three pillars per se. They have different aspects of how much they take over and how much they do inside of the cloud. So in an infrastructure as a cloud, which may, for lack of better terms, might be the most common use of the cloud nowadays, which is I'm going to fire up a server in AWS, otherwise known as Amazon Web Services, or the Google Cloud, or Microsoft Azure, and I'm going to have my server not on premise, not in my four walls, but I'm going to have a virtual server or virtual machine out on their cloud platform, and I'm going to manage it just like I manage the one that's in my four walls. I'm going to load software onto it. I'm going to manage the OS system. I'm going to, I'm just putting all the heavy lifting of the server and the aspects of the server in the cloud, but I'm not going to do anything around different in regards to OS or applications. Platform as a service is more for the programming guys or people that say, I'm going to create a platform, a weather tracking platform, and I'm going to put it inside of the Microsoft Azure platform, and I'm going to publish it out as an application, maybe as a web application that could be hosted inside of that platform or could be hosted somewhere else. But I'm going to use the platform as the application itself. Excuse me. SaaS, software as a service, really takes the whole stack and says, I'm going to utilize every part of the platform and the server base to manage the offering of the software as a service. So a great example of that might be something as simple as Google Gmail. I mean, when you log into Gmail, you don't know what server you're going on to, you don't know what OS they're running, and you are accessing the application. It all runs virtually in the cloud. You can increase your storage on that application very simply. You can, whether you're getting 3 emails a day or 1,500 emails a day, it sort of is all hidden behind the scenes for you on how they're managing your account and that application for your particular instance. All right, moving on. We're going to talk about the 3 major benefits and kind of talk about the pillars as we see them in our definition, which is how do we open up access to a system? How do we open up storage, or how do we store our data, and where is it? And how does the benefit of computing come into the cloud atmosphere? So with that being said, we're going to talk about access first, and what we've done, and we'll go through this, and we'll open up for questions and answers later. So if you want to ask a question at this point, or as we go through this, if you could maybe put a header in the chat and say, what the overall topic is about, whether it's access, storage, or computing, and whether it is or something else, that's fine by us as well. We'll kind of do that in the chat window of Teams, or at the very end, we'll just open up mics and let everyone ask questions. But how we frame this aspect for this session is, we've kind of gotten questions over the years from customers and clients that say, what about this about the cloud? What about that? And we've kind of phrased our questions in regards to access, storage, and computing. And Nate's going to ask the question, and then we'll kind of open dialogue around what the answer is to that question. So Nate, if you can get ready.
Yeah, this is where I get to jump in, everybody. So if you know me, you know I like to talk. And before we do this, I want to just take a second and say thanks, Jeremy. If you haven't met Jeremy before, I encourage you, reach out by email. We'll have all that information here on the last slide. Jeremy's here to help you with moving to the cloud. Any questions you may have, any confusion that may surround it. And again, that's the overall theme of our webinar series. You guys notice we're going to do this every other Thursday. So we're going to walk you through some of the aspects of moving to the cloud, and Jeremy's really going to be our guide. So thank you, Jeremy, for all the hard work and effort in putting this together. And I know from your last slide there, you were saying by your definition, the 3 major benefits, we're saying access, storage, and computing. And the first topic we'll start with is access. And the main question that we get a lot of time, of course, we're talking about, how does the cloud improve access to my ERP data? And the first question is, can I access my ERP from anywhere at any time? So I think that's a good setup, Jeremy. Can you shed some insight on an answer?
Yeah, I think this is sort of a question that I say sort of. The question that comes to it is anywhere, anytime is a definite yes. The maybe or the concern might be, do you have internet access, right?
Okay.
So if you don't have internet, you can't get to the cloud, which therefore you can't access the solution. So that's a base layer need and function, is to have a good, reliable, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but good, reliable internet connection. But the overall consensus of the cloud and one of the major reasons to go to the cloud, especially in the time we're at, as we've kind of gotten COVID blues going on, and it threw the monkey wrench in our everyday life of, can I work remote? And
Right.
I didn't bring it up, but I'm actually traveling today, and the idea of working from anywhere at any time is becoming ingrained in our society now, and
Yes.
that really gives you the ability to do that. The internet is key. The uptime, which we'll talk about again a little bit later, is phenomenal on these platforms now. Some of the terminology is the 4 nines, which mean are they going to be up 99.9999% of the time, and give me access from anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. The internet access and some things we take for granted, such as internet access, unless you've been without it before. And that's something that pretty routinely, like you said, anywhere you go, 99.9% of the time you have that access. So I know kind of blending the cloud and hosting at the same time, but really the answer is the same whether you're hosting it or it's a true cloud solution, right? As long as you have internet access, you can access the ERP.
True.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, so the next question kind of dovetails off of that is what kind of access is available? Are we talking got to be at my computer, my laptop? Can I access it by my phone?
And again, this question really lends its hand to a question of maybe as well. Certainly, accessing it from a desktop, if you're using the cloud to put up a server in the cloud to get that heavy lifting off of your infrastructure in house and move it off for more reliability, more scalability, things that are kind of housed within that model. Again, anytime, anywhere is kind of a given. The device that you can, or the device or the operating system, I say operating system meaning web or remote desktop or whatnot, becomes a question of what application are you running. If you're running Sage 100 as an example, since I think everyone in this group is running Sage 100, you can run Sage 100 in a remote desktop atmosphere and a remote application atmosphere, which is kind of a secondary layer to remote desktop, but it's the same. But it needs the environment, the Windows operating system run. It can't run over the web.
Okay.
Now, from a mobile perspective, again, it's an application that cannot run over the mobile application, other than running within our RDP session, maybe on a tablet. Those are things that are available. But that also throws a bit of a crux in. It's not necessarily the easiest way to access a Sage 100, a desktop-based program. Via a tablet. It becomes a little bit clunky, but it can be done I would say, from inquiry type of activity. I don't think I'd want to do a lot of heavy use or heavy entry on that.
That's a good point, right? And that is a very good point. Is what are you looking to accomplish by accessing it from your phone? Is it something that you really want to be doing? Or are you just going to be taking a quick look? These are all good questions as you consider, what's my best path forward and thinking about the cloud. So no, that's excellent. And you spoke about it before, and I don't mean to jump the gun, but you said typical uptime. What kind of percentage? I think you said 99.9, pretty much all the time, but I will make that disclaimer. I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at, again, when you look at platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, they're touting now that they're 4.9 uptime, which is 99.9999% of the time they're up. I mean, when you get the redundancy and the scalability of the solution that they're providing, that uptime is key. Now, that doesn't mean, I think one misnomer is, that doesn't mean you're going to be uptime of that much because your internet connection might be down, or something of that nature that would interrupt that. But as far as them saying their access is there, and they're guaranteeing that nowadays, a lot of them in their SLA will actually pay you if the uptime is not there. So they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is on being up 99.99%.
It's a very important part of the equation. Yes, right.
Yeah, but if your network provider goes down, obviously that has nothing to do with them. Their machine is ready and their computing power is ready for you to access. You just don't have access to get to it because you're off the internet.
Squirrel bites the line, or an accident out front, or something of that nature. Yeah, you can't prevent that kind of stuff. So that makes total sense. And Jeremy, you mentioned before, we do have the chat window available, so feel free to ask questions as we go through if there's a topic of interest, or we can address everything at the end and turn the mics live. Then you could feel free to ask your question live. But from an access perspective, I know that was the first benefit. I think that pretty much wraps up, the questions that I have about that. Moving on to the second benefit you mentioned, which was storage. And the most common question is, where is my data stored and who owns it? That's a fair question.
It is a fair question, and the question gets derived a little bit differently depending on, which, again, one of those pillars that you're in. If you're in the first pillar with the IaaS, if I could say that multiple times, you are really in control of your whole destiny, right? So you don't own the hardware anymore, but you're going to own the licensing for the operating system and SQL Server if you're using a database, SQL as a database function. You're going to own that licensing. You're going to own the data that you put onto that box, and you're going to be able to back it up and take it offline and do whatever you want to it. But it's stored in the cloud, and that cloud storage is available to you 100% of the time and can be scaled. We'll talk about that in a second. But when you're going to the right on that image in your head, to the platform or to the SaaS model, the question really comes down to the contract. Some and these have changed over time, so my examples might be crude and might be outdated at this point, but someone like a NetSuite would say in their contract that they own the data, that you can export the data into formats like Excel, kind of data dump it, but they technically own the data because it's in a shared database that is what they call multi-tenant. So to define that a little bit for you, when you're thinking about Sage 100, you have a database, and that database is created because you created a company code, and that company code created this set of files, these database files. So every company inside of Sage 100 has its own cylinder, its own database structure, and then so if you have 15 companies, you'd have 15 databases to store and back up. Inside of a multi-tenant database, something like a Gmail or a NetSuite or those guys, they call multi-tenant databases. It's one large database for every customer's data, and the records are tagged with a piece of metadata that makes it related to you. So in those cases, a lot of those will say they own the data because it's part of this multi-tenant. It's not necessarily saying that you can't get the data off, but it is a nuance to recommend or to know. Other solutions that are possibly SaaS model kind of take a hybrid model, and the one that we're going to talk about in our next session, and as we kind of go down this path, is Acumatica. And Acumatica says you're going to run in a SaaS world. You can be in a what they call a public cloud, meaning I can be part of their infrastructure, so they manage the OS and the servers and everything is accessed. So I'm part of the shared environment from an operating system perspective, but my database is separate and run as a separate cylinder, and that data is owned by the customer and can be ported and backed up and taken off site as well. So it's a kind of a hybrid model to take advantage of all the different aspects of that world of where is it storage and who owns it.
That's a good answer, and that's something that you really should focus on, as you consider moving to the cloud. That's an easy one to answer. It's just, what situation are you in, right? And what's important to you, right? So I think that probably would lead right into my next question, which is, it would probably vary by company size, I'm sure, is what you'll answer with. But so how much storage is available? How much do I need? How do I know all that?
Yeah, and this is the beauty of the cloud. This is one aspect, and we'll talk about the other aspect when we get to computing. But scalability and the ability to add more storage is, for lack of better terms, and not to sound cliche, but it's kind of a couple clicks away.
Yeah.
To give you an example, we had a client in my previous job that was a large data set in nature. They did about 40,000 invoices a week. And so in about 3 to 5 line items per invoice, and that set of data grows exponentially week over week, just gobs and gobs of data in that invoice file. That particular client, started off a couple different ways, ended up putting their environment in the Azure platform, and again, we would run into a storage threshold, let's say 80% of storage capacity, and the client would say, we need to add more. So click, add another 5 gig of data onto their storage platform. So in sense of this does go by provider, but in a sense, if you're in a true cloud atmosphere, meaning AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud, you're in a sense an environment that storage is to infinity, for lack of better terms, or maybe just shy of infinity, because they have the wherewithal to add as much as you possibly need.
Yeah, and you're not messing around with having to go locate another server and then hook it into the system. That's probably one of the nice points of that as well too. I could imagine you have somebody log into the admin console, add some storage, and away you go, right? So well, that's excellent. So
yeah, I think the question that you have when you look at this environment, and in the previous company I was with, we started off in an environment where we put our solution in the cloud, and for lack of better terms, our cloud was a bunch of servers that we put in a co-location that we managed. That can be considered the cloud. I think it's a DIY cloud per se, right?
Right.
There's still a hardware component, and our storage to our clients, the storage was infinite, but to our underneath the covers, and once that ran out, we had a problem from the standpoint of we needed to replace that hard drive, which anytime when you're touching hardware, there's the risk that it's going to be down, that you're going to hot swap the drive out and put a new hot swap drive in, and something fails, it doesn't boot up properly. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts at that point versus, we ultimately moved in that particular case to the Google environment, and then we were just saying, hey, we need more space. Click, and space is added.
Well, that's excellent. And we had a question come up, and I think probably now is a good time to address it if you have a moment, Jeremy. Is there a per gig charge for storage space?
There is. I don't want to quote any particular pricing, but storage is probably one of the cheapest things you buy on the cloud nowadays. To quickly be up to a terabyte for a pretty reasonable price is not unheard of. So storage is one of the cheaper things to buy. When we get into our next section with computing, scaling computing kind of has more of an upcharge, and there's different ways to mitigate that as well. We'll talk about that in the next.
No, that's fair, and I would encourage, if you have questions about that, that's we can dive straight into it. And again, everybody's situation may be different, so we don't want to give a vague answer. Certainly, engage us further, and we'll be happy to help you with that. but the backups, and you've got the question on the screen there already. And this is a friendly reminder to anybody who's listening, please go make sure you're backing up your Sage data, and then also make sure that the backup is actually working. We've seen both situations. I'm sure you can imagine the pain that you go through just trying to get your data back. So as simple as it can be, Jeremy, what happens with the backups? Who takes care of those and how often?
Yeah, this is again one of those really, insurance blankets that's put on by being in the cloud. Certainly, I think you want to take it to another one step further, but backups and storage of those backups, storage is paid for, right? You're going to pay for the incremental amount of space you need to store a backup, but backup files are typically compressed in a smaller footprint anyways. But backups are something that they're going to take inherently with being in the cloud, especially when you're in those atmospheres like AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. They're going to be part of the SLA, that they're going to make sure, again, with 99.99% of the uptime, they're not only backing up and making sure you have a backup of your database, which might be more on you to say, I want a snapshot of our database for 2019 and 2020 and backup, so you have some historical reference. But then there's also the backup for disaster recovery. Something happens, what am I going to do to bring the system back up to a point in time that's not, that's reasonably, not far away. And that's where your comment comes in huge, Nate, which is, a lot of people think they're taking a backup and that they have it on a USB drive, or they have it up in Carbonite, a solution that's taking it off site. And when the disaster happens, and the disaster is the first time they ever check that backup, you definitely want to go through a disaster recovery mock, scenario to see that you can back up and restore that data. And you may want to think about how you can back up your infrastructure files as well as your data files. Data files are probably the most pinnacle. Something happened to the server. Do I have a backup of my company file that I can put on another server quickly to bring the company back up and running? You can back up or basically take a snapshot of the infrastructure so that you can restore all the components of the server, and then throw the backup of the data files on that server, and then you're totally back up and running in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and it happens to the best of us. I mean, we've seen it in all different scenarios, right? But the point of all of it is, like you said, you don't want to test it when you're in the scenario. And actually, it's a good question that came in is, what protocols are in place to keep our data in the cloud safe? We've seen a number of issues relating to cybersecurity and breaches recently. And yeah, every day you're hearing more and more about it. So can you speak to that a little bit, Jeremy?
Yeah, we're gonna actually cover that in a minute at the end of this session. So let's hold that thought for a moment.
Excellent. Okay, so that was our second benefit. We talked about. You have a third benefit as well too. If we want to jump over to that was the computing side of the house. So with the cloud, is performance an issue?
So performance has an interesting take on it. It has a couple different avenues of performance. When you think about performing a function on the cloud, performance really isn't an issue because you can scale up and you can make it as powerful as it needs to be to run that scenario that you're running. Performance can be an issue if your pipe is small to that internet and your end, it's kind of like, it's kind of like, is YouTube TV going to be fast for me? It could be slow for me because I'm on a dial-up connection, but it could be fast for Nate because he's on a cable modem with 100-bit down, right? So you got to look at it in two layers. One is, what is the pipe that you have up to the cloud application? Because that Google and those guys have all the bandwidth available and redundancy and power, power. They're going to be up and running all the time, and that pipe is big. The question is the pipe that you have out to the internet or coming down from the internet, is that as powerful as you need for performance purposes.
Yeah, I think a good example of that would be like Google Docs, right? I mean, a lot of people are using Google Docs and Microsoft Word online, and even us today, we're using Teams, right? So you may see a little bit of performance issues here and there. Maybe, you know, a voice cuts out once in a while, but no, that's spot on and kind of what we expected, right? But as far as scaling, you know, what you mentioned it before, adding on, and then we were gonna to get to it right now. So can it scale?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes with the storage conversation, which is, you know, if I need more RAM or processing speed, you know, it's if I'm in a true cloud environment. Again, I want to make sure that I've said that a couple of times, so I want to make sure I define that a little bit better. A true cloud environment be on AWS Cloud, Google Cloud, or Azure, where you're in this environment that is virtual and, you know, virtually scalable on all fronts: storage, computing, RAM, processing speed, all that is entwined into that. Versus being a part of a group that says, "I'll host a server for you." That'd be considered sort of what they call a co-location environment, where I have a physical rack or a box that's just not sitting in my four walls, but it's inside of a building that might be secured and have redundant internet and redundant power. I have some aspects of life that are making life easier for me, but there's still a physical piece of hardware that someone, whether it be leased or whether it be managed by someone that owns it, or yourself, that says when the battery goes down in the box, I can go in and I need to physically change that battery. Someone's not going to do that for me. So when I say kind of the true cloud environment, it's more talking about the AWS model, where I'm releasing all of that need and function up to Amazon to manage that virtual machine and the hardware behind it. So when you're in that environment, again, you can scale up as far as you need. I think in another example, we had a company in my previous work that had a fairly heavy website, and so they would sell up to, I want to say, is about 7,000 items. They sold a lot of convenience store items like cigarette holders and energy drinks and all this, and there's just gobs and gobs of that junk out there, right? So when they looked at performance, their performance was, they had a database on a cloud platform, and they had a website that was hosted on a cloud platform. And the question is the performance of the database being accessed by the website, and that it met the maybe the standard that we're all used to, which is anymore the society is everything's got to be immediate. So
True.
When I click on energy drinks, you know, how long does it take to bring that page up? And scaling the computing power, you know, that's a balance of, you know, is that a need? Is the call made to the SQL server, and the SQL server is doing the processing, and that needs to be scaled up, or does the website processing need to be scaled up? And that's, again, not for Nate and I to answer, because we're not overly technical IT guys, but somewhere that scale has to be increased to give that immediate response to a website.
Well, and you nailed the cause and effect. You know, the time that it takes for a page, its responsiveness, it does impact whether you stay on the site or not, right? How many times have you been on a site where you clicked on it, you really wanted to read it, but it took longer than expected, or you wanted, or time you had, whatever the reason is, and you leave the site. So those are that's a hidden, that's a very good point you bring up. It's kind of hidden within all that. But again, folks, that's why we have Jeremy with us. Jeremy has intimate knowledge of the cloud and how some of these things work together. And you could see where just something as simple as being able to scale from the amount of gigabytes you have now to where you need it to be, it translates into real dollars in that instance. So, and I think this is probably the final question about computing, and I'll just ask it as it came in. Can it be seasonal?
one of the beauties of the cloud is the ability to scale and take processing power in a seasonal capacity. Again, kind of back to that one example that the company had 40,000 invoices a week. They were a seasonal business at the holiday season, became much heavier inside of their usage of their website and placing orders.
I thought a Black Friday would be another example of,
absolutely,
Cyber Monday, I guess is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that seasonality, whether it be whether it be something that's sold in the summer or the winter or a holiday season becomes heavier, again, you're paying. The beauty of the scalability of the cloud is you're paying for what you're using, and you can scale it up and scale it down based on that seasonality, to make sure that you're getting out of it what you need to get out of it. And another example I wanted to make sure I brought up, and actually it's part of another slide coming up, which is there's examples of solutions that are SaaS-based, web-based, cloud-based systems that connect to non-cloud on-premise solutions, and Sage 100 would be in that category, from the standpoint of it's built to be on a server and run its own database. There's cloud versions, meaning that they've run it in the cloud on a server. It's still ultimately a server-based solution. Not to try to define that again, but an example of seasonality is and also a solution that also runs in the cloud and was built for the cloud, but can kind of run in a hybrid model with other solutions is a product called Avatax or Vertax, which the idea of that is one database, a multi-tenant database that runs in the cloud to calculate out sales tax. So if you have sales tax needs, and sales tax can, again, I don't live in Ohio anymore, but in Ohio, sales tax can be pretty complicated because there's the village tax, the county tax, the sin tax. It builds up to a ultimate tax rate, and every sale, if you're doing it correct, is the sales tax is happening in the jurisdiction that the sale happened, and that's where a product like an Avatax by Avalara will, as you're finishing up the order or finishing up the invoice, it's going out to the cloud, calculating out the tax, and then bringing that tax back into Sage 100 to assure that you're computing that tax at the right rate, and then also doing all the reporting and all the things that it's good at if you have that particular need. That kind of goes beyond seasonality, but also gives an example of that scalability of, someone like Avatax during the Christmas season or the holiday season, they're probably ramping up their scalability to handle the amount of orders that are coming in based on
point. Yep.
Order volume.
Yeah, pay for what you're using. Yeah, so we talked about access, we talked about storage, and we talked about computing. Of course, that doesn't cover everything, but we only have a certain amount of time here. Anything else that would be worthwhile adding here that we would encourage folks to consider?
Yeah, a couple things that I wanted to bring up, kind of more points, and you hit, and someone had a question earlier about security and update. They didn't ask about updates, but one of the things that's kind of taken for granted in the cloud, when you're, again, going back to that very first graphic, infrastructure versus platform versus SaaS, in those three pillars, you have different security levels and you have different update thought processes that go along. In the infrastructure, again, you're kind of manning your own destiny. The updates to Sage 100 or the applications that you decide to run on that platform are going to be up to you to decide when you want to update, whether that be OS or application. Security, though, is kind of an inherent part of being part of that AWS or Google or Azure cloud base, because certainly they don't want to have a security breach. So they're spending millions and millions of dollars on security solutions that make sure that bad people are not getting into that server. So when you think about crypto locking, or better, maybe a better term is called ransomware, where someone says, I've locked all your files. Give me. I just had a ex-client that had this happen to them. The very first offer by the ransomware people were they wanted 500 grand to unlock their files.
Wow.
They ended up getting them down. They said, well, we have backups, and they had decent backups, but they didn't have backups that covered everything.
The full, yeah.
But they kind of negotiated, and they kind of played it off that they had great backups and they didn't need all the files, and we're able to get it down to, I want to say, $10,000 in fees that they paid to unlock the rest. But that sort of idea just inherently kind of goes away. I mean, you still have the fear of that happening inside of your internal infrastructure or your internal PCs.
Certainly, yeah.
But the vast majority of your solutions being applications for business purposes and business applications being on the servers in the cloud and virtually, they're protecting. And when you talk about updates, again, if you're in that IaaS model, you kind of got the gist that you're doing it on your own, and you're still kind of controlling your own destiny. When you move to a SaaS model, depending on the application is going to dictate whether you're updated automatically or not.
The publisher will update from their side, and you're told when it happens. Is that what you mean?
Correct. Yeah. Some solutions, like if you're running Microsoft CRM or you're running, certainly applications like a Gmail, you don't ever know when they update you. It just
right. Yeah.
It's behind the scenes. It's never an event that happens. But if you're running typically business applications like a Microsoft CRM that might be cloud-based or NetSuite or those solutions that are multi-tenant, they're gonna maybe tell you you're going to be updated to the next version on the 1st of December, and they give you a sandbox to make sure that it's doing everything you want it to do and give you an opportunity to fix it. But you might be able to push it off to the beginning of January and push it off a couple months, but they're going to force you into an update sooner than later.
They want you on the current version. Yeah.
Right. Where true cloud applications like a Gmail or something of that nature are just happening in the background. It's whether you like it or not, you're getting updates on that solution. And then in the hybrid models, like in Acumatica, one you can put it on a private cloud or public cloud, which is managed by them, and they're going to force you sooner than later to be on an update. They're only going to support so many updates back, and typically it's 2 years back.
Sure.
And then they're going to eventually make you update. Maybe being a little bit more liberal on that. But if you're in a private cloud, I mean, you're managing the server base and you've put that application there, but possibly still paying in a SaaS type model, you control your destiny a little bit more. And then if you're in a SaaS based model, you're being forced no matter what.
Yeah, and speaking of updates and the fact that a lot of the folks listening may already have invested in servers and some on-premise equipment, just kind of moving in that direction. There's a couple more things maybe to think about before moving to the cloud.
Yeah, you definitely want to think about, certainly if you just went out and bought a whole new server bank for your office, you're not going to be overly eager to move to the cloud just because you just made an investment, right? So you want to kind of get that return on that investment over time and get your money out of what you just bought. But maybe put a plan in place to start moving the way of the cloud as it makes sense to you, right? And again, that fast and reliable internet, if you don't have that now, that sort of takes the cloud off the plate to begin with, right? You're not going to be a happy user of a cloud-based solution if you don't have that.
No, you will not. Right.
So those are just a couple things to think about from a standpoint of moving to the cloud.
No, that's excellent, Jeremy, and I definitely appreciate it. The audience appreciates it. Dave and Larry certainly appreciate it. So I know there's a couple things you wanted to finish on, but I did want to take a moment to just thank you folks, again, if you haven't spoken with Jeremy, I know he's been making some calls just to kind of check on us, see how we're doing, serving you as the client base. If you haven't spoken with Jeremy yet, I encourage you, write down his email address. It's going to be coming up in a few slides here. And we talked a lot of acronyms, IAS, PAS, SaaS. Don't worry about writing all that stuff down. Call Jeremy, okay? Because every situation is likely going to be particular. And rather than you kind of trying to do some research on your own, very quickly you can kind of get off course. And I would say part of this next slide is, what does the future look like? I know you'll add some things, Jeremy, but I would encourage those who are interested in continuing the conversation. Your next step would be just to reach out to Jeremy. The call's free, and see if he can help you move along the evaluation process. So thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. See, I think and certainly anyone in our crew can get the right resource to answer your questions. So don't hesitate to call any one of us. But
very much so.
But certainly I would be eager to talk to you if you have any questions at this point. When we look at the future, I think the question comes down to, again, that access from anywhere on any device, and again, it's sort of can be taken as a joke, but how applicable is running your ERP on an Apple Watch, or hearing, speaking to an Alexa and accessing that data. I mean, the technology and the connectivity of those devices is where things are moving to. And to give you some real life examples where an Apple Watch or a Fitbit watch can be utilized is, as we get more into a workflow oriented model, as data is being fed out, and that exception to the rule, I'll use one example that's a really common one, which is someone puts a purchase order in for a new laptop at the company, and it's over a threshold of $500. So therefore it needs to go to up to Larry for approval. That type of data can be viewed on a phone or a watch to say, what is the purchase order for? Here's some highlighted data about that information,
right? And
go ahead and push it through and accept accept or deny the processing of that transaction, right? And that could be an application that could be there. That there's some usefulness. You're not going to enter a bunch of stuff on your watch. You're not going to do an over amount of inquiry on your watch, but you might want to know what revenue is for the month and kind of access it, easily, or approval process or something like that.
When's the last time they ordered? How much was on the last order? Yeah.
Right. And when you think about an Alexa, it might be a highlight of the news. How many appointments do I have? How many orders came in yesterday? What's the revenue for the month and the quarter of the year? You might ask those questions as you're roaming around the house.
It's incredible. Yeah.
To get that information, and then it would just read it back to you, right? Those are the different applications. But certainly the future definitely has, again, going back to the challenge that you're into that anywhere, anytime, any device, is when you're in a more of a client-based solution, accessing those on a tablet or on a phone, they don't size correctly, they don't give you a good input ability. When you're looking at the future of business solutions, when they're built for the web and a browser-based interface, that sizing and that application becomes accessible on those devices in a much more meaningful fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing that's kind of coming up as we see it is, by offering up the solution in a lot of different atmospheres and a lot of different devices and abilities to access the data, gives the ability to give more access to people within the entire enterprise. That might be departmental, meaning, right now we don't have the warehouse people on our platform because we didn't want to buy the user license. Well, some of these systems are going to a model of not by license, but they're going by computing and transaction loads. Let everyone in the company use it for the purpose that they need access to the data, and they can maybe they had only access on their phone in the warehouse to do a physical count, once a month. but you're not going to pay for that license. You're going to pay for the usage and the computing power that's behind it. Or abilities for people outside the enterprise, outside the company walls, customers, vendors, suppliers, to maybe get a web portal that they can log into to see information that's pertinent to their aspect of that environment as well. Is really starting to open up as you move into anytime, anywhere, any device, giving relevant information to the right people.
Makes sense. Yep.
The other side, which we hit upon a little bit, and it's at the top, Avalara, when you open up a true web application and the infrastructure is in a web platform, you open up the ability to go to all these other web applications that have open APIs and abilities to connect at a much more rapid rate than it has been in the past. So pointing out a few, like connection to a UPS or a FedEx to calculate out shipping on an order, becomes very simplistic and inside of systems that are web-based, and then again, the one that we're moving down the path with is Acumatica. That's an embedded function that's already built into their system. There is no upcharge to create the integration. The integration is already there. Avatax is another one, or simple things like Teams. As we COVID taught us that applications to get us in presentations and virtual meetings is key. Imagine being on a customer file and hitting a Teams button and calling the customer via Teams and getting an instant meeting going with your customer. Right. Those things are becoming more and more built in and inherent inside these web applications. So that being said, I think one thing I wanted to bring up is we're going to do this, and Nate brought it up earlier, we're going to do these sessions every other week. So the next one is kind of taking a vision into that Cloud ERP, accessing from anytime, anywhere, any device, and kind of what that vision has built in. So using as kind of the initial stages of looking at a ERP or a system that kind of takes advantage of all those different aspects of the cloud. And then the next session is going to be around Inventory Advisor, which is kind of that model. It's a cloud-based system that links into Sage 100, uses its data to present and to do a better job of advising of how inventory can be better utilized, turnover rates and purchasing and lead times and things of that nature to do a better job there. But it's a cloud-based system, a cloud-based solution linked into Sage 100, whether that be on-premise or in Sage's cloud application. So we'll have Russ Graff will be presenting that for us and giving us some insight there. So watch for emails from Nate and registering for those.
Thank you.
And then beyond that, we'll open it up. I guess, Nate, are there any other questions inside the chat?
No, you covered both of them. The question about security in the cloud, you just addressed that. And then, the question about storing, how much you would need and all that. There's a whole process that's involved with it. And again, Jeremy, and you did say anybody on the team here, so you may want to call Larry, you may want to call Dave first. You certainly can call me, I'm here. But Jeremy has kind of taken the driver's seat on this. So if there's any questions you have particular with today's session, please feel free to reach out to any of us. And topics, we're going to be doing this every other week on Thursdays. So thanks again, Jeremy, for your availability. But if there's something that you'd like to hear about, we're not, this isn't set in stone, so send us your suggestions and we'll be happy to look into those.